Thank you very much for having me here. It's a great pleasure. It's a very interesting and stimulating event, I must say. To be very honest with you, I was wondering why I was invited. Because certainly the German standard setter is not the one to look for if it comes to innovation. Probably not even to fostering innovation. That's not crying for compliments, but just to put it a little bit in perspective, the German standard setter has a very limited mandate. Its limited mandate stems from a mandate from the German government, which is confined to group financial reporting only. And to be very precise, that encompasses all consolidation techniques. That's all. No recognition, no measurement, no presentation, no disclosure. And now you understand why I was unsure why I was invited, okay? So we said, well, this would be just too boring, because if you are a standard setter, you want to set norms. So we ventured a bit further, and we got a happy target in the group management report. Group management report, or as the ISB will call it, management commentary, is something where we have put forward guidance, and it is sort of our flagship standard that is actually enforced by the German enforcement panel when it comes to looking at how you set out management's view of life. And that management commentary is compulsory. It's not compulsory for companies to apply our standard, but they would be ill-advised if they're not doing it, because then the auditor has to opine on it, or has to, at least in its audit report, to declare that our standards have not been followed, and that serves its good purpose, I'd say. That group management report has just been updated for the contents of the NFI directive, of the European directive. So it is now, I would say, where probably the UK already are with their strategic report. And we will see where we come to. Part of that group management report covers, of course, non-financial reporting. And much what we've heard today, in essence, is what's being laid down in that management commentary. And I fully agree with a comment made earlier that it's really not non-financial, it's really pre-financial. You could easily say that the accountants have screwed it all up when they have defined what the reporting period is. Because if you just think about it, were the period only a bit longer, say 10 years, much of what used to be non-financial would have become financial easily and would be seen in the accounts through provisions, maybe through assets or other liabilities, or merely as a straight expense. So we should feel guilty a bit. While not fostering innovation, we could at least say we feel the heat. Because obviously there are some companies in my country that try to experiment with new ways, integrated reporting, integrating non-financial and financial information. But to pour some water into the wine, that's still a tiny minority. I would say the flavor of the month is not corn more, it's corn less. They want to do less. They at least do not want to see any change. So I hear the calls as of today. We want to experiment. We want to see what can be done. And I certainly would endorse that. But if I look into the majority of the companies that are in my country, I'd say I observe two trends. Firstly, the accounting division has decreased sharply. So transaction bookkeeping has all gone in shared service centers. There's just a few people left in headquarters, and they have so much on their plate that they just don't want to deal with strategic issues. They just say, we don't want change for better, we just don't want change, because change means cost. That's it. And I think that's something that we need to be cognizant of, whether it's an outlier in my country or whether there are other countries that also are falling into this. I think we have to watch. If we turn to Corn More, and I said I'm generally receptive of that concept, I think a few questions need to be asked. And I was puzzled, whilst this is an event sponsored by Accountancy Europe, that the auditor is the only profession that hasn't shown up today on the stage. Except for Mark, of course. But, well, forget about these auditors. Okay, well, when have you performed the last audit? But I'd say what I mean by that is that the question of auditability and assurance has not been a major topic as of today. And I think that's something we need to be cognizant about. Because the main differentiation that I see today between financial and non-financial reporting is the level of assurance, to a large degree. In my country, management reports are being audited, and the audit opinion needs to be reasonable assurance. So if you now think about stuffing more things into that, the question is, can auditors actually provide that reasonable assurance and not just limited assurance, or no assurance at all? I think that's something worth looking into. If I look finally then into where would I like to see probably the profession going, even the ISB going, to me, I could fully understand that Hans said management commentary is their obvious place to think about non-financial items. But I would see something that I think merits more fruit, and that's actually working on the conceptual framework. I'm cognizant that currently the ISB is undertaking an overhaul of the conceptual framework, but that was in mind with financial reporting. Now, if we think about financial, non-financial, talking about different frameworks, different concepts, different principles, yet thinking about a company that has to apply these two different frameworks, if it only were true, in one report or in one corporate report, whatever form it takes, then obviously there has to be an interface, that the materiality concept that we apply in financial reporting ties into the materiality principles that are being used for non-financial reporting. The same goes for the user, or for the question, what is an asset? We have, for instance, said that for every asset there should be a liability. Now, if you look into the framework of the ISB, you will find out there may be assets without any liabilities and vice versa. How could that be? Because the flip side might actually be the broader public. Now, if you then tie it to non-financial reporting, surely there would be the broad public. And it could be the asset holder, or it could be those that bear the liability. So I think it would be useful to actually look at the fringes and the interfaces and work on those, because that, in the end, would make it probably more useful for preparers to align it and really create one integrated report. And I will stop here, because I think I have given you some food for thought, even if I'm not fostering innovation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Mr. Please. Mr. de Cambourg.
Yes, I was asking myself if we were in a yellow submarine or if we were going to fly to the moon. I don't know. It's for our piano player to let us know at the end. I have to confess several sins before I speak. The first one is I am a former auditor. Mark, I'm sorry. I'm a former entrepreneur as well, and I turned standard setter and regulator in the shadow of my life. You know how it is, Hans. Okay. So, next, I'm not sure we have a mandate. I don't know who has a mandate here, which is fine, by the way, to start with. So, with or without a mandate, I think I will express myself just as a European citizen, a simple European citizen in this interesting field, which is, of course, a passion for all European citizens. So I'd like to make 5 remarks. The first one is that whether we like it or not, innovation is happening all the time and fast in the field of corporate reporting. So I mentioned last week in a seminar where the two of us were, that we were at risk of being the priests of an empty temple, and I was very glad to see that Massimo had taken the expression. No copyright, you can use it again. But in fact, I used it for the first time in Paris in January when we had a panel in the context of a trustees meeting. Yes, it's a risk, it's provocative, because I seriously believe that financial information is not going to disappear tomorrow. However, we have to be extremely careful, because there is a context where we could marginalize financial information to a point where we would be, quote unquote, the priests of empty temples. That being said, as a former auditor, I tried to think about a world where there would be limited financial information, standardized financial information, and no audit. It would be the jungle. So quite frankly, progress which has been achieved over decades to get to a point where financial information is reasonably standardized, and remember what Europe was at the end of the 90s. We are critical today, but how was it 15 years or 17 years ago? And where the audit would be, they are so bad, the auditors, conflicts of interest, their techniques are old-fashioned, etc. Let's imagine that we are without those two pillars of proper corporate information, and that would be bad. So a robust financial information is pivotal, but it is a starting point. Second comment, within the confines of financial information, we still have a lot of work to do. A lot of work. It's not as if we had a system that is perfect and that we can recite the gospel on a regular basis in front of an empty crowd. No. We have lots of decisions to make. For instance, we have to make sure that we establish the proper boundaries between fair value and cost, historical cost, which is an evolution we have seen, but which is not finalized. We also have to put an emphasis on the profit and loss, the creation of value, versus balance sheet. Too much emphasis on balance sheet, blah, blah, blah. So I could continue on that, but I think that all the standard setters have to work hard to make sure that we improve financial information. I mentioned primary users. I am of the opinion that the primary users are much broader than we think, that the primary users are the management, and that if we don't create a continuity between management and financial information, you are at risk of creating gaps. I'm looking, no, he's okay, so that's fine. Okay. Comment number 3, challenges. On the basis of what I would call a SWOT analysis, there are obvious threats. The perimeter of financial information per se is not very clear. We hear about cross-referencing, part of financial information would be elsewhere. The concept of annual report is so-so. It will be broken down in a number of places where you can find information. That is interesting, but that is creating a challenge, because what will be audited, what will not be audited, for instance. Same thing with the timing. Is it an ongoing flow, or do we produce financial information on a quarterly or half-year basis, and that's it? And the rest of it is just information. And of course, we have non-financial information. We mentioned integrated reporting is an extremely interesting concept. I would only mention that the firm I was working with in 2000 produced 2 books about it, which roughly was talking about exactly the same themes as the one we're talking today. So it takes time, obviously. But now I think we are at a critical moment. So I'm optimist. I'm an optimist by birth, so I continue. Then those challenges are significant. Interpretation, for instance. You can have a centralized system, or you can have a decentralized system, but you cannot stop blogs to exist and say, oh, by the way, I read this paragraph that way, and blah, 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 blah. All of a sudden, you have 100 persons that think that it should be read that way. So we are in a world where information is spreading extremely quickly. So we have a problem. Taxonomy is also a problem, a question, I would say, a challenge, because when you are creating the taxonomy to permit, to allow, a language, a communication, and digitalization, you certainly somehow set a standard, willy-nilly, as the Brits would say. So my next point is, of course, where is innovation in this? Where is it coming from? From regulators and standard setters. I think, first of all, it's not prohibited to have ideas without or with a mandate. So you can certainly say a number of things and try to promote progress. I feel that I can do that. Now, will I be listened to is another story, but I feel I can do it. The other point is that in my organization, we promote research. So we have a significant research program. And in the research program, we do not explore only accounting topics. We try to explore a broader scope of themes. We need to be able to think out of the box. And to a certain extent, thinking out of the box starts with research, with academics. Sometimes, I can tell you my experience, but it would be too long, about some research which was disappointing, the outcome was disappointing, and some research which was extremely interesting. And finally, my last point is, where is innovation going to happen? I don't think that anyone has a monopoly of that. I think, first of all, I think that the private initiative, it will be a combination, if I oversimplify, between private and public initiatives, I'm sure. With probably more public initiative now than in the recent past, because without public initiative, such a theme is not going to be supported enough. Next, it shouldn't be probably mandatory in a first stage, so it will start from best practices, recommended best practices, and then the market will recognize what is good and what is not. When I say market, I mention stakeholders at large, not in general, not the stakeholders, the pure investors only. And it is important to have a public initiative because it avoids cultural biases to a certain extent. At least there is a level of accountability, and it avoids the bias of technocracy, which is something we are accused of on a regular basis, to be technocrats. So democratic accountability. Now, a last word. Where will it be coming from? I'm not sure that the North American continent at this stage is very prone to embark upon initiatives in that field, my feeling. Maybe I'm wrong, I hope to be wrong. So global initiatives need to be supported by some strong regions that, okay. Could it be coming from Asia? I'm not saying Asia Pacific, yeah? for Robin and Ian. So unless maybe China decides to lead the way somehow, which is possible. So of course, I see two interesting, I say two, European Union, including or not including the UK, for them to decide. But certainly you have, that's where it's happening at the moment. That's where it's boiling at the moment. So that's where the public initiative should take place. I've been too long.
No,
but he's gone, that's fine.
Yeah, you
I saw it leaving the room, so I said I can continue.
He's given up. Thank you very much, Mr. de Cambourg. And then we move into a somewhat other type of regulator, the European Standards and Markets Authority. I don't know whether all of you are aware of that. Maybe you have to say a few words on that, Roxana, on what you exactly do and what your objective is. You never know, you never know. But also from your perspective, you know, the same topic of innovation, given specifically your role in Europe. We're most interested to hear your views.
Thank you very much, Wim. I actually mentioned from the beginning it's very challenging to put a regulator in a panel where we talk about financial innovation, because typically we are seen as being the guardian of the compliance with the law. And this is, I think, our primary mission. We don't have to hide about that. So it doesn't mean that we don't see, we don't watch the space, we don't follow what is happening in the financial innovation space. And I hope I'm going to try to convince you about that with the remarks I'm going to make in my speech. I would like to focus on 3 topics. First one is that reporting is moving towards being wider and perhaps already even more integrated. We saw that following the recent financial crisis and economic crisis, financing in Europe need to move towards making sure that we provide capital to a more sustainable economy. And in the last year, there have been a lot of initiatives and calls for a better portrait of the business of companies and the necessity to have more transparency around the some elements which are outside the pure financial items. And there are a number of elements like environmental factors, human rights, diversity, governance, social and employees policies, and so on. And I can tell you, if we want to go a little bit broader than just corporate reporting, that there is a significant movement already in the direction of integrating already some of these aspects into some legislative acts in Europe. And there are important pieces of legislation, like, for example, MiFID, UCITS, IFMD, and more recently, Prospectus, where these factors are taken into account, even though you're going to find those with different names, with different status, and so on. More recently, in the high-level expert group report, we saw that there is even a requirement where they intend to ask the Commission to include a sustainability test in the legislation in order to make into account that some other aspects are counted when there are proposals for legislation. Now, if I was to move back a little bit more on the example of the directive on non-financial information and the guidelines published this summer by the Commission, we can definitely see that there are a number of elements which have been put in there, and a lot of that has been commented, and I found in different presentations. We talk about the business models, about the strategies and factors that are contributing to a business in bringing added value. One important element for us, as we are the guardian of companies complying with the law in both financial area but also non-financial information area, is actually how these 2 items are linked. And probably this is one of the topics which is not yet sufficiently developed and it's even far too early to talk about this, because obviously the application of this directive is not yet in place. It will only start with next year. So I think what will be interesting for us, and I'm sure that there will be a kind of learning experience. I don't think we have to be non-realistic and expect to have a perfect reporting from the very first year, but there will be a learning curve, and probably we need to all build on that. But I think what will be interesting is to see which are the models that companies are trying to build on in providing that information. From an enforcement perspective, definitely what we do hope to see, and I think I also heard some of these in some of the presentation today, were like, we want to make sure that information which is presented is consistent, is material, is relevant, and is entity specific. And I'm going to stop here because I think it's not maybe need for more, but that would help us in making sure that we have something which is relevant and that on which investors could later on build in order to make informative investment decision. So in other words, what I'm trying to say, and I know this is typically what companies in particular are thinking about, is we don't want to say just a tick-the-box approach. The second message I wanted to give to you today is about the fact that the future of corporate reporting will be severely impacted by the change in technology. And I think we have already seen that by the fact that already financing, the way companies are funded, has already changed. Of course, still the bulk of the investment is done probably through big asset managers and so on, but nowadays we have crowdfunding platforms and we have alternatives ways of making investment. And even those companies are not the big ones, but maybe just a startup, I think it's an alternative way of seeing how companies will be financed in the future. So I think it's expected to see that also maybe the new generation investors will seek to get access to the information in a different way. And probably we have to be really aware that actually the technology can help in that and really facilitate the access to the information and actually help investors in comparing data more quickly. It doesn't mean that will substitute any judgmental part, and probably I'm going to say here that I like very much what was presented in the previous presentation when I heard that actually it's good to spend at least 1 hour reading into the financial information, non-financial information of a company. But definitely technology will change the way that data is consumed. And in that respect, my organization, for those of you who doesn't know, following the mandate which was given by the Commission in the Transparency Directive, has worked in proposing a technical standard to implement the digital reporting in the annual financial report. And we will come up with that technical standard before the end of the year. I must say also, and I share here this surprise we had, that there are still in Europe, in particular in one jurisdiction, some reluctance in moving to digital reporting, even it sounds a bit counterintuitive while we are talking here about the future of corporate reporting. We hope, nevertheless, we're going to publish some examples, and we really hope that companies will see that actually this will help them to probably move the boundary also between financial and non-financial, and somehow perhaps making also the core and more easier to put it in practice, because in the end technology shall help also to navigate more easily and move through different parts of a report. Finally, I think there is a need of convergence of different initiatives and probably different standards in corporate reporting. One is certainly the idea that actually we want to see more link between the financial and non-financial information. And we all know that the ISB successful story in Europe, which started more than a decade ago, was a very good example, and I think that's why probably also as part of Core and More, that was the idea to think whether the ISB could be the institution which could take that debate on. I don't think it's up to me to really give a clear answer on that, because I think the answer is complicated, and as this topic enters also into the political arena, probably there is the policymaker, the one who is best placed actually to give that role. Nevertheless, there are probably a couple of points which I would like to address as a challenge in a new way maybe for the ISB. And I think one was already mentioned by Hans. There are clearly examples of areas in the non-financial information which could be better linked in the financial information, and we mentioned about the intangible assets. There are other examples in the area of energy, probably also in the area of insurance. And I think it's, I remember that a number of years ago, there was a statement like transparency is good, but it's not enough. If the standard is wrong, we need to fix the standard. So probably I would try to apply the same thing and say, well, transparency or non-financial information is good, but it's not enough. It's better to link it to the financial information, of course, whether it's possible. So definitely there is a period of challenge. We only embark, I think, in this journey. We don't know yet who are the ones who will be driving that. But probably I would like to say that at least we shall look at the financial innovation like not being as threatening as some try to say. And I think if there is sufficient dynamism, transparency, and determination, I think we can manage to do it, hopefully in a not very long-term period. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So now we have some time for further discussion on innovation. Well, I think what would be good to start with is the innovation that has come across a couple of times already today, of that corporate reporting lab. And I just wonder, for each of you, is that the way to go, first of all? And a kind of a question B is, what could be the role of each of you in such an initiative? Whoever wants to start.
The innovator. Okay. To answer the last question first, yes, I want to be part of it. I think it would be very useful to actually have something like that. Probably not just for exploring core and more, but in general, to float new ideas, to think about issues like how to report on intangibles, for instance. If we believe that these should really belong into a financial report, then let's experiment how that could be done and where it could go and whether there are ways and how to deal with the measurement uncertainty, for instance. But just coming back to financial and non-financial information, I think it would be useful. But I think those that I really want to see in that area is the people from public policy. Because I think that, at least in my country, I feel that much of the innovation is being hampered by restrictive regulation, that you can do whatever you want, but only as a supplement. And that, to me, defies the logic of really experimenting. You need to give a certain assurance, of course. There needs to be a core frame, and that probably core is being meant in a different way as in the paper, core financial to start with, probably, so that the regulators and the authorities can sign off and say, yeah, you are released of your reporting burden. But thereafter, I think, then it should be left with the companies to experiment. But without that, I think it would be very difficult. It needs really volunteers to do so. And as I said, in my country, I don't see many of these volunteering for it.
What is a kind of, well, I was about to say driving or prohibiting specifically the German companies to spend time on this? I think we heard earlier today that paying attention to corporate reporting drives better understanding of your company, integrated thinking, integrated acting. And still in Germany, you say, well, reporting, as I understood it from you, is just a compliance exercise, minimum cost.
That would be a little harsh, probably, in doing injustice to those that actually are venturing down that field. But if you just look into the DAX companies, you could say out of the 30 companies that are listed in the blue chip index, 30 are going towards further integration, and the other 30 are going the exact opposite. A complete split up and say, do sustainability where sustainability is being dealt with. They have their own audience, they have their ways to communicate the information, they have a different reporting frequency, they have a different level of assurance, and please don't interfere with our highly effective financial processes. So, yes, there are companies that are actually venturing, but to be honest with you, I'd say that the majority of the integrated reports that I see from my country, I wouldn't label as being integrated in the sense the IRC would like to see them being integrated.
Right.
They are probably more a condensed management report, which is fair, but I think is not really integrated in the thinking of linking the 6 capitals to each other.
And what is your response, but maybe also view as a standards committee? As you said in the beginning, your mandate is quite restricted, but also quite clear with it, I assume. Mm-hmm. But you referred also to the, I call it management commentary,
yes.
that you see as your flagship standard, actually. So that's where I would say you have the room to drive reporting and take a view. How is that for you?
Well, we will see, because that standard is only applicable as of this year, and we will see what comes out of it. But if I review the fights that we had over the development of that amendment, I'd say I wouldn't be surprised if many companies or many users struggle. And why is that? Our management commentary standard was developed from a financial reporting perspective. I was saying, put yourself into management's feet, management shoes, and let us know something about those issues that don't show up in the financials. So risk reporting, looking into the future, business model, all these things that are being dealt with. But it was still from a financial angle. Now, with the NFI directive, of course, things do have a slightly different angle, because now the broader public comes in as another user, question mark. And that, I think, poses a number of very interesting questions, because even if we say that the core user is still the investor, I wonder whether we could still talk about general purpose financial statements. If a majority out of the users probably are no longer interested into the entire package, but want to see their package, but being given or provided with a level of assurance that we know from financial reporting. So there are a number of challenges. They haven't been brought to our attention yet. We have seen that there are different views. We try to reconcile them in the amendment of the standard, but we will see how it is being applied.
And Patrick, you referred to research that you could do as a regulator to, well, at least to sketch the landscape and the developments. Would you see that as, to Andreas's point on the limitation, as a driver for innovation, to drive as a regulator further reporting?
Standard setter rather than regulator.
Sorry.
No. Slight difference. No. Yes, I think so. Well, first of all, you have the common sense approach to the evolution you see. And then you have the research, which is medium term and long term. So common sense would, for instance, flag out, I think, a number of issues or concerns we need to address on a daily basis. I can name a couple. The first one is digitalization. Digitalization with two consequences. Consequence number one, taxonomy. Is taxonomy a standard setting activity, or is it just a translation? I think we need to review and have an open debate on that, in particular in the European Union, where we endorse the standards, but we do not endorse the taxonomy. And frankly, in a principles-based environment, where in theory, the way the information is presented is not hugely standardized, taxonomy is going to have an impact on the way people are going to converge in terms of presentation. The other consequence is that you need to address the question of the perimeter, the boundaries of financial information, and the cross-referencing with other information, and the ongoing flow or versus the one step at a time, quarterly or half-year information. Because if you don't do that, we will be lost. I mean, we will have lost the GPS we were operating with so far. So in terms, this is one key point which I see as possibly being addressed via common sense and proper dialogue with the existing institutions that are trying to progress the matter forward. As regards research, of course, research is opening new ways. We have a symposium at the end of the year, which is organized by ANC, December 11. You can register online, but careful. I mean, it's limited number of seats. So on accounting and digitalization. And one of the questions that we are asking, and we have asked academics to think about, which is our last roundtable, because we see the impact of digitalization to the presentation of information. I mentioned it. But are the digital industries that are emerging creating new transactions that our current accounting rules are not addressing properly? For instance, an initial coin offering, how do we account for it? Frankly, I don't have a clue, but I think we need to spend time on it. And the academics maybe will come on December 11th with, I don't see anything new, it's something simple, blah, blah, blah. Or, oh, by the way, this is a new transaction. And we should address new transactions from a financial perspective and also maybe from a non-financial perspective, if we cannot address it on a financial information basis.
Right. And Roxana, you referred now, you say non-financial, you referred to in your introduction to the link between non-financial and financial, and again, we've heard that throughout the day. You're looking behind stability of the financial system within the EU. How important would you see going forward, the non-financial information in terms of corporate reporting and informing that financial stability? Is that something you have on your radar at ASMA?
Well, I think our primary mission is in terms of investor protection, but we definitely contribute in watching whether financial stability could be threatened. Now, I wouldn't go as far as saying that somebody noticed like some of the factors as, threatening financial stability. I don't think I would go in that direction, but it's rather, I think we have seen that such information, as I mentioned in my speech, they appear now as embedded elements in different parts of the conduits in the financial markets. And that's why I mentioned the different acts like the MiFID and UCITS and so on, because they are part of the elements which an asset manager is supposed to take into account, and they look, for example, where they are investing. And I think necessarily, whether we want it or we didn't want, I think it's part of the life. And also, if we were to move to a sustainable economy to the long term, and if we were trying to move investors and push them to forget a bit the short term, but trying to become real investors, like having a long-term perspective, I think that dimension is inevitable. And that's why I think, okay, probably with the entry into application of the directive necessarily, as we have a role and we need to see what will be the information that will come out, necessarily we'll focus our attention on those topics. Now, I think, we are the ones who are coming a bit at the end, like companies, they have to prepare the information, auditors are looking at, and we're a bit like, we come and see what is happening. In some cases, we took a more proactive role. I think in this case, as we didn't really have a mandate, we were a bit more contemplating, and probably now we're at the phase of stepping in as well.
Right. And I started a couple of minutes ago with that question on corporate reporting lab. We didn't get your response yet, but also, as you have maybe experienced during the day, we try to figure out a little who should start and who should be involved. Some already voluntarily raised their hands. But for ESMA, as you work for the investors, as you just said, and at the European level, you might be the right party to maybe initiate a conversation. How do you see that? Is that a challenging question? I don't know.
I noticed,
You can also say, I don't know.
But I noticed during the day, everybody say, well, I like to be part of it, but I don't like to drive the message, so I think it's a bit thing. No, but, well, definitely we want to be part of a dialogue, because I think it's important probably to bring our angle, and I think our way of seeing in the development of some of the standards or financial innovation is to make sure that things are not going completely wrong. Mm-hmm. So now probably somewhere, some European corporate lab, it's good to happen, because there is a need of an experimental phase. I'm not sure that my organization will take the lead, or at least I don't see it at this point in time. But we definitely want to see what is happening, and we'll be trying to engage as much as possible in that.
Patrick raises his hand to volunteer.
I just wanted to have a reaction to that. It looks like the bus is packed. The bus to have something, different from pure and strict financial information. You have many passengers, but we don't have a driver so far. And why? We have potential drivers, but nobody has given the driving license. And by the way, for a long journey, you probably need a cooperation of drivers, i.e., you can drive for 8 hours, not more. It becomes dangerous, so you need a team of drivers to drive a bus like that. Sorry about the image. With a little help from my friend.
I'm just checking whether there's any question from any of you on the standard setters and the regulator. Please. We know the procedure by now, right? Mic left cover, push the button, let's talk kind of button. Please.
Press the button.
Okay.
Technology.
Yeah, technology, yeah, well, that's the next panel, I guess, yeah. Thomas Petruschke from BSD Consulting, based in Berlin, and I would like to take up a few thoughts, actually, Mr. Barckow elaborated on. I agree, currently I think it's really, we are on a plateau when it comes to integrated reporting in, or let's say non-financial reporting in Germany. I definitely agree. We are a GI training partner, also IRC training partner, so we are really in touch with a lot of companies. However, Mr. Barckow, I'm not so sure that you are really wrong on this panel, I have to say. In fact, I do believe for two reasons that like the topic of innovation is actually perfectly positioned on your desk. First of all, I do think your organization currently is maybe at least as important as IRC and GI in Germany, I have to say. Yeah, most companies really look very close what you are doing and how you actually interpreting the law, because you were saying it. I mean, the law is not so clear as everybody thinks, right? So the discussions you are talking about basically means there is also room for interpretation, and that means also for innovation in a sense. Yeah. So from my perspective, you're right. I mean, you have the obligation to stick with the law, which is fair enough, that's your job. However, I think what you can do is you can, in a sense, set the stage and also define the space for innovation, right? For example, certain elements of the directive, like the materiality concept, the business model, or even the linkage between financial and non-financial information. I mean, that's not clearly defined at all. Right. And what you can do is, you could, for example, propose to the companies via your standard saying, for example, with the business model, see, we would recommend to have a look in the IRC framework for, the 6 capitals model as a good way to really elaborate on the business model, right?
Thank you. Yeah. I think that the remark is clear. You want a much more proactive role of you, Mr. Barckow.
So yeah, your role of innovation.
And you can set the stage and set the scene.
Thank you very much for the flowers. Actually, I also do. We actually have a bank account. We do not need to open up one. I take your point. I think if you really want to go for real innovation, I think you have to go where the norms are being set, which is where the directive is being created. Because if you follow the process, you do have the directive, you have the transposition into national law, and then comes the national standard setter interpreting what the heck the other two parties might have meant. It would be far more efficient, of course, if you're right there the first time of the day and say, okay, how could our thinking, our experience that we have seen on the ground influence actually public policy making? That I think would make it far more useful. And I mean, that's the way how I would see it. For instance, how we collaborate with the ISB, for instance, when it comes to their management commentary. I mean, they propose, and we engage with them. Obviously, we are bound in an open process, and not always we win, but sometimes we may be able to influence the course of action. I think as long as it being taking place in the political arena, and as not to say I dislike that, because we do have a public policy process that I fully subscribe to, I think our mandate is limited. So we just have to take this, bear this in mind. But obviously, we can go further. I agree with you, but probably not as much as Accountancy Europe with Core and More in actually saying, okay, you really reduce your financial report to, say, 30 pages and the rest goes to wherever people would like. I think that would not be possible, at least not under German law at the moment.
There's one other question here on the left. Go ahead.
John Turner from XBRL International. I think you can hear me.
Yep.
So 2 questions. Patrick, you mentioned your concerns about taxonomies as perhaps standard setting by stealth. I wondered whether you were familiar with the due process mechanisms that the ISB goes through in terms of the definition of those taxonomy terms, and whether what you were actually calling for was for EFRAG to have a confirmatory role in relation to that exercise, or whether you have some other mechanism by which digitization can occur.
I think my answer is going to be simple. One, I'm familiar but not an expert of how it operates at ISB level, but I know there is a level of governance about that. Now, we spend a lot of time when we have meetings with the ISB on standards themselves and little time on taxonomy. So it's difficult for me to be able to judge the importance of the time spent. Now, you have understood clearly, as an EFRAG board member, I feel that Europe should have some sort of endorsement. Is it an endorsement per se? I don't know. But if it is creating a structure, which I think it will end up with, then that should be reviewed somehow.
Actually, it's done by ESMA, but this was the way the Commission chose to do it. I mean, they put it in our mandate now. I'm not going to comment why they didn't give it to EFRAG. It simply has been done by that.
Can I perhaps just well, form as an arbitrator between the two, but this is the innovator speaking here. Yeah. I think in European law there is currently a missing link because the endorsement process that's being done on the standards is only done on the mandatory parts of the standard, whereas this taxonomy, of course, reaches further and includes the entire literature that comes out of the ISB. So there is a missing gap. Either you would think that EFRAG should endorse the entire core standard, by which time then probably the taxonomy becomes a real translation, or ESMA should only, quote unquote, endorse the mandatory parts that EFRAG has also reviewed for endorsement. So there is a gap between the two sorts.
And if I may, this is...
Sorry, but what part of non-mandatory IFRS does the taxonomy cover?
Volume B.
Huh?
Volume B of your bound volume, which we don't endorse. So the basis, the examples...
Yeah, but we don't know.
And by the way,
Well,
the same should be said to a certain extent with management commentary. Management commentary, as you clearly mentioned, is an interesting document, but it's not a standard per se, and it's not endorsed in the EU.
No, but I really wonder how much of the taxonomy is based on those volumes.
Yeah.
Now it becomes technical. I think this is worth an
It's not the
offline
case.
conversation.
Yeah.
There's one final question, sorry, behind you, for this session. Go ahead.
It's Paul George from the FRC. I've got a comment and then a question. The comment, which is, and there's been mention of it already today, which is that we've set up a financial reporting lab in the UK. We're both a standard setter and a regulator. I think the advantage of us doing it was it gave credibility to the marketplace that we were not going to be encouraging companies to do something which was in breach of the current framework. And therefore what we were trying to do is find innovative solutions to common reporting challenges. So that's the comment. I think regulators and standard setters can do this. I think the question is, if you want to do it on a pan-European basis, what organisation can pull together all of the different parties and give it the credibility it will need to get companies to push forward?
Right, and in the next session we'll have Phil Fitzgerald from the Financial Reporting Lab to talk about that. I think we have had a great discussion on innovation, although initially it didn't look like that. Please thank our speakers of today. Thank you very much.